Ever wondered why some sentences sound more formal, or even mysterious, than others? One of the key tricks in English grammar is the use of active and passive voice. These two structures can completely change the way information is presented, often making it sound more professional, objective, or even suspenseful. Whether you're writing a report, telling a story, or crafting a compelling argument, knowing when to switch between active and passive voice can give you a powerful edge. In this video, we'll dive deep into what active and passive voice really mean, how they work, and when to use each one for maximum effect. In English, we can write sentences in two main ways: active voice and passive voice. These two forms are used to focus on different parts of the sentence. In active voice, the subject of the sentence does the action. In passive voice, the action is done to the subject. Learning both voices helps you write and speak more clearly. Let's understand how each one works and when to use them. Active voice is the most direct and natural way of speaking or writing in English. It puts focus on the person or thing doing the action. For example, the cat chased the mouse. In this sentence, the subject is the cat, and it is doing the action of chasing. This makes the sentence clear and easy to follow. Most of the time, we use active voice in everyday speech and writing. Passive voice is used when the focus is on the action or the object receiving the action. For example, the mouse was chased by the cat. Here, the focus is more on the mouse and what happened to it. Sometimes we don't know who did the action, and sometimes it's not important. For example, the window was broken. We don't know who broke it, and that might not matter. To change a sentence from active to passive, we need to change the structure. The object of the active sentence becomes the subject of the passive one. Then we use the verb to be in the correct tense, followed by the past participle of the main verb. For example, she writes a letter becomes a letter is written by her. This structure is used in formal writing, reports, or when the doer is unknown. Here is another example: they built the bridge in 2010. This is in active voice. To make it passive, say, the bridge was built in 2010. Notice how we focus on the bridge, not who built it. Sometimes we do not need to say, by them, or, by someone. If it's clear or not important, we can leave out the doer. Let's look at the tense changes more closely. In the present simple tense, active voice like he cleans the room becomes the room is cleaned. In past simple, he cleaned the room changes to the room was cleaned. Always remember to use the right form of to be depending on the tense. Then use the past participle of the main verb. This is how passive voice is formed. In present continuous, she is painting the house becomes the house is being painted. The phrase is being shows it is happening now. In past continuous, they were watching a movie becomes a movie was being watched. In future tense, she will bake a cake becomes a cake will be baked. Notice how the verb forms change to match the tense. For perfect tenses, the changes are also clear. He has written a book becomes a book has been written. In the past perfect, she had cooked dinner turns into dinner had been cooked. In future perfect, they will have finished the work becomes the work will have been finished. The helping verb been always stays with perfect tenses in passive voice. Let's look at modal verbs in passive voice. Take a sentence like you should wash the car. The passive form is the car should be washed. Another example is he must complete the project, which becomes the project must be completed. With modal verbs like can, must, should, may, we use the pattern, modal be past participle. Sometimes we use passive voice to sound politer or formal. For example, instead of saying you made a mistake, we can say a mistake was made. This avoids directly blaming someone. In academic writing or reports, passive voice is often preferred. It sounds more neutral and objective, especially in scientific or technical writing. Let's compare more examples to see the difference. The teacher explained the lesson is active. The lesson was explained by the teacher is passive. The police arrested the thief is active. The thief was arrested by the police is passive. You can see that the focus shifts from who did the action to what happened to the object. Sometimes the passive voice sounds awkward or wordy, especially in casual speech. For example, the cake was eaten by the dog is correct but feels heavier than the dog ate the cake. That's why active voice is usually better for everyday talking. Use passive voice only when necessary or when the subject isn't known or important. Let's practice a few sentences. Change he opens the door into passive, the door is opened. Now take she is writing a poem and change it, a poem is being written. Try they have painted the wall into passive, the wall has been painted. Practicing like this helps you remember the structure more easily. In passive voice, sometimes we do not include the person who did the action. If it is obvious or not needed, we leave it out. For example, the homework was done is fine on its own. If we say the homework was done by the student, it adds detail, but it's not always necessary. In many cases, the passive voice just tells what happened, not who did it. Let's go through different tenses again with examples in both voices. Present simple, she reads books. Books are read. Past simple, he drove the car. The car was driven. Present continuous, they are building a house. A house is being built. Past continuous, she was watching a movie. A movie was being watched. Future simple, we will start the project. The project will be started. Future perfect, they will have fixed the roof. The roof will have been fixed. Present perfect, he has written many letters. Many letters have been written. Past perfect, she had cleaned the room. The room had been cleaned. Now let's look at some negative sentences. In active, he does not clean the kitchen. Passive, the kitchen is not cleaned. In past tense, they did not finish the job. Passive, the job was not finished. Notice how we keep the helping verb not in the correct position. This makes the sentence negative while staying grammatically correct. Questions in passive voice also follow a special structure. In active, did she complete the report? Passive, was the report completed? Another one, is he writing a letter? Passive, is a letter being written? In each case, move the verb to be before the subject, and use the past participle. These patterns take time but become easy with practice. Let's try some more questions. Active, have they cleaned the floor? Passive, has the floor been cleaned? Active, will she sing the song? Passive, will the song be sung? When you form questions in the passive voice, focus on correct word order and verb tense. It can be tricky at first but gets easier over time. Some verbs cannot be used in passive voice. These are usually intransitive verbs, verbs that do not take an object. For example, go, arrive, sleep, or exist. You can say he sleeps but not he is slept. Since there's no object to become the subject in passive, these verbs do not work in passive sentences. Also, some passive sentences sound strange or confusing if used in the wrong context. For example, mistakes were made by me sounds odd. It's clearer to say I made mistakes. So, passive voice is not always the best choice. Use it only when it fits the message or tone you want to express. Active voice is usually stronger and more direct. There are special passive structures too. For example, it is said that, or he is known to. These are called impersonal passive constructions. For example, people say she is talented because it is said that she is talented. Or she is known to sing beautifully. These are used often in news, reports, or formal speech. Let's try some impersonal passive examples. People believe he is honest. It is believed that he is honest. Another one, everyone knows she works hard. She is known to work hard. These patterns allow you to express ideas without clearly stating who believes or knows them, which adds a neutral and formal tone. Passive voice is also used in instructions or announcements. For example, visitors are not allowed beyond this point. Or the form must be signed before submission. These are common in signs, manuals, or rules. The passive tone sounds more official and removes the focus from who is doing the action. In storytelling or news, passive voice can add drama or mystery. For example, the painting was stolen last night. The sentence focuses on what happened, not who did it. In mystery books, you often see passive sentences to create suspense. The door was left open. Nothing was found. This style makes the reader curious. Finally, let's look at tips for mastering active and passive voice. First, always identify the subject, verb, and object. Second, practice changing sentences from one voice to the other. Third, pay attention to tense and verb forms. Fourth, read and listen to examples in books and media. And fifth, write your own sentences to build confidence. So now you've learned what active and passive voice are, how to form them, when to use them, and how they change in different tenses. You've seen examples, tried transformations, and explored special cases. Keep practicing regularly to remember the rules. With time, using both voices will become natural for you. Let's now look at sentences with two objects, which are common in passive voice. Take this example, she gave him a gift. This has two objects, him, indirect object, and a gift, direct object. We can make two passive sentences. He was given a gift or a gift was given to him. Both are correct. The choice depends on what you want to emphasize. Using the correct form of the verb is still important when dealing with two objects. For example, they sent her an invitation can become she was sent an invitation or an invitation was sent to her. In both cases, use the past participle of send, which is sent. Choosing which passive form to use depends on clarity and importance of the object. Sometimes, passive voice can be used to sound more diplomatic or less harsh. For instance, Instead of saying you made a mistake, which can sound blaming, you might say a mistake was made. This is useful in business emails or official messages. It softens the tone and focuses on the situation rather than the person. That's a powerful use of passive voice. In literature or creative writing, passive voice can be used to create rhythm or vary sentence style. For example, the door creaked open. A shadow was seen moving across the floor. These passive sentences can help set a mysterious or distant mood. Writers use them on purpose for stylistic effect. So passive voice isn't always bad, it just depends on how it's used. Passive voice is also useful in scientific and academic writing. In lab reports or research papers, it's often more important to focus on the action or result than on the person doing it. For example, the solution was heated to 100 degrees Celsius. This tells the reader what happened without saying who did it. It makes the writing sound formal and objective. Another important use of passive voice is in legal or official documents. For example, the contract was signed on April 3rd or the defendant was found guilty. These sentences are clear, formal, and remove personal bias. Passive voice in legal writing focuses on the action or outcome. It's a standard style in rules, laws, and procedures. Let's now look at how to spot passive voice quickly. If a sentence has a form of to be followed by a past participle, and possibly followed by someone, it's passive. For example, the cake was baked by Anna. The verb was baked is the clue. Not all sentences with was are passive, but when it's followed by a past participle, it usually is. It's also useful to check if the sentence has a clear subject doing the action. In active voice, the subject is obvious. In passive voice, the subject might be missing or appear after by. For example, in the letter was mailed, we don't know who mailed it. In John mailed the letter, the subject, John, is doing the action, so it's active. A good exercise is to take a paragraph and rewrite it in passive voice. For example, the chef prepared the meal. He served it with care. Everyone enjoyed the food. Now in passive, the meal was prepared by the chef. It was served with care. The food was enjoyed by everyone. This helps you practice thinking in both voices. Another way to practice is by writing news headlines or short reports. Start with active voice. Police arrested 3 suspects. Now change to passive. 3 suspects were arrested. These are common in newspapers or reports. Passive voice helps create a neutral, informative tone. Practicing with headlines builds strong sentence control. Sometimes, passive voice helps avoid awkward or long subjects. For example, instead of saying someone in the group who was not identified took the laptop, you can say the laptop was taken. This avoids the need for a long or unclear subject. It helps you be more concise. In formal writing, this is often preferred for clarity. Passive voice is also useful when you want to keep information secret. For example, mistakes were made doesn't say who made them. Or the decision was made doesn't tell who made it. This vagueness can be helpful in politics or diplomacy. It avoids pointing fingers. But it can also hide responsibility, so use it wisely. Let's now explore a few more examples with modal verbs in passive form. You can watch the movie becomes the movie can be watched. He might win the prize becomes the prize might be won. Modal verbs like can, may, might, must, should, would, could all follow the pattern, modal be past participle. It's simple once you remember the rule. There are also passive infinitives. For example, I want to be heard. Here, to be heard is the passive infinitive. Another example is the book needs to be read. This is often used with verbs like need, want, expect, hope, and prefer. In these cases, to be past participle expresses something that should or must happen. Another useful form is the get passive. Instead of the window was broken, you can say the window got broken. This form is informal and more common in speech than writing. It can also suggest surprise or accident. For example, he got hurt at work sounds more casual than he was hurt at work. Both are correct but have different tones. Let's look at one more kind of passive, causative passive. These are sentences like I had my car washed or she got her hair cut. In these, someone causes someone else to do the action. You're not doing it yourself, but you're arranging for it to be done. It's not exactly the same as normal passive voice, but it follows a similar structure. Practicing passive voice regularly helps you become more comfortable switching between styles. You can read English newspapers, underline all passive sentences, and rewrite them in active voice. Or take an active text from a novel and change it to passive. It's a great way to train your brain and become more flexible with grammar. You can also play grammar games or use flashcards to practice verb forms and sentence structures. Make 2 stacks, one with subjects, one with verbs. Try to form both active and passive versions. For example, draw the teacher and explain. Active, the teacher explains the topic. Passive, the topic is explained by the teacher. Another fun idea is using role play. One person says an active sentence, and the other changes it to passive, or vice versa. Example, the mechanic fixed the car. Partner replies, the car was fixed by the mechanic. This kind of real-time practice improves your reaction speed and helps with speaking naturally. You can also watch videos or listen to podcasts and write down sentences you hear in passive voice. Pause the audio, write the sentence, and then change it to active. It works best with news, documentaries, or formal talks, since they often use passive voice. This builds listening and grammar skills at the same time. To summarize, passive voice is a powerful part of English grammar. It helps you shift focus, avoid repetition, and write more formally or politely. When used well, it improves your writing. But when overused, it can make sentences vague or dull. Learning when and how to use passive voice is the key to mastering it. You now understand basic and advanced uses of passive voice. You've practiced with different tenses, modals, questions, negatives, and more. You've also learned how to use it in real life, news, reports, formal writing, and everyday speech. Keep reviewing, practicing, and playing with sentence structures. That's how you become fluent and flexible in English. Another interesting area is how passive voice interacts with phrasal verbs. A phrasal verb is made of a verb and a particle like on, up, or off. In passive voice, the particle usually stays with the verb. For example, they called off the meeting becomes the meeting was called off. It's important to keep the particle in the right place. Moving it can confuse the meaning. Phrasal verbs are very common in English, and learning how to make them passive helps a lot. For example, they turned down the offer becomes the offer was turned down. Someone has filled out the form changes to the form has been filled out. Practice makes it easier to know which phrasal verbs can be used passively and which cannot. In English, some verbs are rarely or never used in the passive voice. These include state verbs like belong, resemble, own, and fit. You don't say the shirt is belong to me. That's incorrect. These verbs describe conditions or relationships, not actions, so they don't fit into passive constructions naturally. It's best to keep them in active voice. Sometimes, passive voice is used in poetry or song lyrics to create mood or rhythm. For example, a line like her name was whispered in the wind sounds more poetic than someone whispered her name in the wind. The passive voice adds softness, distance, or even mystery. Writers and songwriters often use it to set a tone or stir emotion. Let's also look at how passive voice is used in advertising and branding. Companies often use it to focus on the experience rather than the doer. For example, your car is serviced with care or every detail is checked. These phrases make the service feel thoughtful and professional. Passive voice helps center the attention on the customer and results. In history books or biographies, passive voice often appears when the writer wants to focus on what happened rather than who caused it. The war was declared in 1914. This puts the focus on the event itself. In some cases, the writer might not even know who did the action, so passive voice is the best choice to keep things accurate but neutral. In news reporting, passive voice is commonly used to delay naming the subject or to keep the report objective. For example, shots were fired in the early hours of the morning. This sentence tells us what happened without saying who fired the shots. Later, once more facts are known, the subject may be added. This style keeps the tone factual and cautious. It's also helpful to know that in some languages, passive voice is rarely used or formed differently. So, if English isn't your first language, the concept of passive voice might feel strange. But once you understand how the subject and object switch places, and how verb forms change, it becomes easier to recognize and use correctly. Passive constructions can also be long and complex in advanced writing. For example, the new system has been thoroughly tested and carefully reviewed by a panel of international experts. This type of sentence is common in academic or technical writing. It provides detailed information while keeping the focus on the process or results, not the people involved. In spoken English, passive voice can sometimes sound too formal or distant. That's why, in casual conversations, people prefer the active voice. For instance, "They fixed my car" is more common than "my car was fixed." Still, passive voice appears in everyday speech when we don't know who did something, like "my phone was stolen last night." English learners sometimes confuse passive voice with past tense because both can use was or were. But the key difference is the use of the past participle. "He was tired" is not passive, it's just past tense with an adjective. "He was helped" is passive because helped is a past participle and it describes an action done to the subject. It's helpful to make a habit of checking your writing for overuse of passive voice. You can read your sentences and ask, who is doing the action? If it's unclear or missing, and that's not your goal, try rewriting in active voice. For example, the document was reviewed could become the manager reviewed the document, which sounds stronger. Some writing tools and grammar checkers even highlight passive sentences so you can choose whether to change them. This is useful when editing essays, reports, or emails. It's not that passive voice is wrong, but using it too often can make writing feel weak or unclear. Balance is key, mix both voices for better style and flow. Let's think about how passive voice is used in storytelling from the point of view of characters. If a character is feeling powerless or distant from events, passive voice can reflect that emotion. For example, everything was taken from him shows helplessness. Writers use this technique to match the grammar with the emotional state of a character. Passive voice can also make instructions sound more general and impersonal. Compare "you must wear a helmet" with "helmets must be worn." The second version is more formal and less direct. That's why passive voice is common in safety rules, user manuals, and regulations. It focuses on the action, not on who should do it. Sometimes you'll hear a mix of active and passive structures in one sentence. For example, while the house was being cleaned, the children played outside. This creates a clear picture with two actions happening at once. Using different voices in the same sentence allows for variation and more detailed storytelling or description. Another passive form includes using have with been and the past participle. For example, the house has been sold. This is present perfect passive. It tells us the action is completed but still important now. Similarly, the work had been finished before the deadline is past perfect passive. These forms are helpful in reports and summaries, sometimes. We use passive voice to avoid sounding too direct or forceful. For instance, in customer service, "your order has been delayed" sounds politer than "we delayed your order." It removes the focus from blame and keeps the tone calm. Passive voice is often used this way in apologies, updates, and sensitive situations. In film and TV scripts, passive voice is used to shift attention to the action. For example, "the building was surrounded by police" instantly paints a picture of the scene. There's no need to say police officers surrounded the building. Passive voice lets the reader focus on the event rather than the people doing it. Even in jokes or sarcastic comments, passive voice can be useful. For example, "mistakes were made, but not by me." This sentence avoids taking blame and sounds humorous. The grammar stays correct, but the tone depends on how it's said. That's another way passive voice allows for creative or indirect expression in speech. When reading or writing fiction, notice how authors choose between active and passive depending on pace and tension. Active voice keeps things moving fast. "He slammed the door." Passive slows it down. "The door was slammed shut." This balance helps guide the reader's experience. Passive voice adds weight and detail when needed. Lastly, learning to use both voices is a sign of strong grammar and writing skill. Some tests and exams even include tasks where you must convert active to passive or vice versa. Being able to switch easily shows a deep understanding of sentence structure and verb use. Practice will make this process automatic over time, when working with reported speech. Passive voice sometimes plays a role. For example, "people say that he is a genius" can be rewritten as "he is said to be a genius." This form is common in journalism or formal writing. Another example is it is believed that the painting is valuable. These phrases let the writer report ideas without naming a specific person. This special use of passive is helpful when expressing common beliefs, rumors, or general knowledge. The actor is thought to live in Paris is another example. It sounds distant and neutral, which is useful in news articles or polite conversation. It helps avoid pointing to a specific source. That's why it appears in serious or official writing. Passive voice can also work in conditional sentences, especially when talking about hypothetical or formal situations. For example, if the law is broken, there will be consequences. Another version, if help is needed, press this button. These forms keep the focus on the condition or event itself, not the person involved. It's a calm, instructive tone. There's also a difference between using being and been in passive structures. Being is used in continuous tenses, like the room is being cleaned. This tells us the action is happening now. Been is used in perfect tenses, like the room has been cleaned, which means the action is finished. These details help express time clearly. Sometimes passive voice is useful in summaries, like in academic or business writing. For example, 3 methods were tested. Only one was successful. These short passive statements focus on the results. They keep the report neat and objective. Writers often use passive to emphasize findings over people in research or project summaries. Passive voice can appear in questions, which sometimes sound more polite or formal. For example, has the report been finished? Or was the package delivered? These questions focus on the result. Compare with the active form, did you finish the report? Or did he deliver the package? The passive version sounds more official and less direct. In everyday situations, people use passive voice to sound less confrontational. For example, instead of saying you broke the glass, someone might say, the glass was broken. This shifts attention away from blame. It helps keep conversations calm and polite, especially when discussing accidents or problems. You might also hear passive voice in announcements or automated messages. For example, your call is being transferred, or the doors will be opened shortly. These messages are neutral and do not mention who is taking the action. It sounds professional and suits the style of customer service or public communication. In some languages, passive voice looks very different, so English learners may need time to adjust. In English, we form passive by using a form of be and the past participle. But in some languages, a prefix, suffix, or word change may express passive. This difference can cause confusion, so practicing sentence structure is important. Passive voice can help hide information when needed. For example, in mystery stories, the jewels were stolen during the night gives readers the fact but not the criminal. This keeps suspense alive. Writers often use this to withhold key details and build tension until the right moment in the story. When used carefully, passive voice can help a sentence flow better, especially when linking ideas. Take this pair, the project was delayed. As a result, the deadline was missed. Both are passive, and they keep the focus on the chain of events. If written actively, it might distract with too many subjects doing actions. In resumes or CVs, people often use passive to keep the focus on results. For example, several new systems were implemented or a 20% increase in sales was achieved. It makes the statement sound formal and professional. Passive voice works well in such documents to highlight achievements without always using I or we. You can also use passive voice to avoid repetition in writing. Imagine you have said the staff cleaned the rooms. The staff prepared the meals. Rewriting as the rooms were cleaned. The meals were prepared removes the repeated subject. It keeps the writing smoother and more elegant without sounding dull. Passive voice is sometimes preferred in academic writing because it removes personal bias. For example, the hypothesis was tested under various conditions. Avoid saying who tested it. This keeps the focus on the process and makes the writing feel more scientific. Active voice is not wrong, but passive is often chosen for this purpose. In official letters or workplace communication, passive can soften commands. Instead of saying submit the report by Friday, one might write the report should be submitted by Friday. This version is less harsh and more respectful. It's a common technique in professional emails and formal instructions. You can also use passive voice when giving descriptions of objects or places. For example, the walls are painted white or the windows were designed to face the garden. This helps describe the appearance or design of something without mentioning the designer or painter. It focuses on what is seen or experienced. Children's books sometimes use passive voice to describe events clearly. For example, the toys were taken out of the box, or the story was read before bedtime. These sentences sound gentle and clear. Passive voice is helpful when the reader is still learning and doesn't need too many subjects in every sentence. Passive voice also appears in job instructions or service procedures. For example, the machine must be turned off before cleaning. It gives clear steps without naming the person. That way, the instruction applies to everyone. It's direct and universal, which is important in training manuals and workplace guides. Even in cooking instructions, passive voice is common. The onions are chopped, the sauce is stirred, or the dish is served hot. These phrases give focus to the steps and ingredients. Passive voice here helps the reader concentrate on the action rather than who is doing it. Since the cook is always the reader, you'll also find passive voice in environmental or social reports. Forests are being cut down or laws have been passed to protect wildlife. These sentences tell what is happening, often without saying who is responsible. It gives an overview of the situation and lets readers focus on the issue, not just the people behind it. In advertising slogans, passive voice can make products sound luxurious or well-made. For example, crafted with care or designed for comfort. These short phrases don't say who made the item, but they sound smooth and appealing. Passive voice gives them a professional, polished tone that works well in branding. Finally, when learning English, mastering passive voice helps you understand a wider range of texts. From books and articles to instructions and reports, passive voice appears everywhere. Knowing how to recognize it and use it makes your English more flexible and advanced. It opens the door to better writing and deeper understanding. In formal debates or speeches, passive voice can help keep the language neutral. For example, someone might say, mistakes were made during the process, instead of naming who made the mistakes. This allows the speaker to focus on moving forward instead of assigning blame. It also sounds more polished and less emotional, which suits professional situations. Passive voice here acts like a shield, helping the speaker stay calm and controlled. Another useful aspect of passive voice is how it helps create a sense of process or system. Sentences like applications are reviewed monthly or orders are shipped within 48 hours show that something happens regularly. This is common in business communication. It tells the reader what happens without focusing on individual workers. It creates a sense of order, consistency, and reliability in how things are done. In science fiction or fantasy writing, passive voice is often used to build mystery or suspense. A sentence like "the portal was opened" leaves the reader wondering who opened it. This helps create an eerie or magical tone. It also lets the writer slowly reveal details over time, which is perfect for building tension. Passive voice adds atmosphere when the speaker doesn't want to give away everything at once. You'll also notice passive voice in instructions where the person taking action is assumed. For example, the lid should be closed tightly after use. This is often seen on packaging, warning labels, or directions. It makes the instruction apply to anyone without saying you directly. This keeps things formal and avoids sounding too personal or bossy. It's a subtle but useful way to guide people clearly. Another interesting use of passive voice is in diplomacy or politics. Politicians often use it to avoid directly blaming someone. For example, mistakes were made during the negotiation. Avoid saying who made them. It sounds vague on purpose, allowing the speaker to stay neutral. It's often used to calm down tense situations or avoid public backlash. This kind of careful language depends heavily on the passive voice. When translating from other languages into English, sometimes passive voice is necessary to keep the original meaning. This happens especially when the source language avoids naming the subject. For example, es word beschlossen in German becomes "it was decided" in English. The passive form helps express a shared or unknown decision. Knowing how to use this in English helps translators stay accurate and natural. In education, teachers might use passive voice to focus on learning goals. They might say, "the topic will be introduced tomorrow," rather than "I will introduce the topic tomorrow." This makes the lesson seem like a shared process rather than a personal act. It helps create a calm and equal tone in the classroom. Passive voice plays a part in making instructions sound open and supportive.